Jim, you talk about a New Testament chain of custody. The term chain of custody, what do you mean by that?
Well, sometimes in cases, especially old cases, you really have a question about whether or not the thing that's in front of a jury today was actually part of the crime scene 30 years ago. Because sometimes we don't have great records. Certainly didn't have digital photographs back then. So you might have, say, a shell casing in the trial. And you got to ask yourself, is that shell casing really part of the original scene? Or maybe it was dropped in property 5 years after the fact. How would I know? If maybe somebody's trying to taint the evidence. How do I know some corrupt detective hasn't put this piece of property in the evidence and now it's part of the case when it was never at the crime scene? We've got to be able to ask ourselves that question. And I think something similar happens with the gospel accounts. We know that by the time they're affirmed as canonical in the Council of Laodicea, we've got a certain set of stories. How do we know the stories weren't changed? Maybe just 50 or 60 or 100 years prior to the council, but well after the actual events. So what we have in the council is not precisely what we had in the first century when Jesus was ministering, but instead we have a corruption that occurred late. That's why it's important for us to develop a chain of custody and see, do we have pictures of Jesus at the crime scene that we can then compare to the next detective who came along, the next officer, who took that property and brought it to the crime lab and then took that property into court? Same thing with the Gospels. Do we have an eyewitness at the scene who gives it to some other detective, a disciple or a student, who then gives it to somebody else and gets it all the way to the council? If so, and if they took a good picture along the way, we can look at the picture and see if the story of Jesus is accurate over time.